The rain fell in sheets, drumming against Lieutenant Petr Kovac's helmet as he led his squad through the muddy forest path. Water streamed down his face, mixing with the sweat and grime of 3 days' hard march. Behind him trudged 5 equally miserable soldiers, a microcosm of the fractured country they were fighting to hold together. "Lieutenant, we need to find shelter," called Emir Begovic, the squad's Bosniak medic. His usually precise movements had grown sluggish in the downpour. "If this keeps up, we'll be treating trenchfoot by morning." Kovac wiped rain from his eyes, squinting through the gathering dusk. Their extraction point was still 15 kilometers away, and headquarters had made it clear no transport until the scheduled pickup in 3 days. The storm had materialized suddenly, turning the forest trails into muddy streams and soaking them to the bone. "There's a village 2 kilometers northeast," said Marko Jovanovic, consulting his waterlogged map. The Croatian soldier was their navigator, a human compass with an uncanny ability to find his way through the most difficult terrain. Abandoned since '92. Should have intact structures. Kovac nodded. "We'll head there. Find something defensible for the night." The brothers, Luka and Ante Peric, exchanged glances. Ante, the younger of the two, spoke up. "What about mines, Lieutenant? These abandoned places?" "We'll be careful," interrupted Dragan Nikolic, the squad's Serbian heavy weapons specialist. "Better a slight risk than guaranteed pneumonia." He shifted his machine gun to his other shoulder, the metal gleaming dully in the fading light. They moved in practice formation despite their exhaustion, eyes scanning the tree line, boots squelching through mud. The war had taught them to remain vigilant, even when their bodies screamed for rest. Each man represented a different piece of Yugoslavia's ethnic puzzle: Croatian, Serbian, Bosniak, now serving together in Bosnia's defense forces. Their unity was both a symbol and an anomaly in this war that had turned neighbor against neighbor. The village appeared as Marko had promised, a cluster of stone and wooden structures nestled in a small valley. Most were partially collapsed, roofs caved in from artillery or neglect. But at the edge of the settlement stood a 3-story house that had weathered the war better than its neighbors. Its windows were broken, and bullet holes pockmarked its facade, but the roof and walls remained intact. "That one," Kovac decided, pointing to the house. "Marko, Dragan, secure the perimeter. Luka, Ante, check the ground floor. Emir, with me." They approached cautiously, weapons ready. The brothers disappeared through the front door while Kovac and Emir circled around to the back. The garden was overgrown, fruit trees gone wild. A child's swing hung lopsided from a massive oak, creaking in the wind. "Clear," came Luka's voice from inside. The interior of the house told a different story than its relatively intact exterior. Furniture lay overturned, cabinet contents spilled across floors. More disturbing were the dark stains splattered across one living room wall, the unmistakable pattern of blood spray. Bullet holes clustered at standing height. Kovac had seen enough crime scenes to read what had happened: executions. "Whole place is empty," Ante reported, emerging from the kitchen. "No bodies, at least." "Second floor clear," Marko called down the staircase. "Third floor has a collapsed section, but one good room." Kovac nodded. "We'll set up here for the night. Dragan, secure the doors. Emir, see what you can find for a fire. We need to dry out." As the men busied themselves with establishing their temporary base, Emir moved more slowly than the others, his eyes lingering on the bloodstains and bullet holes. "Something wrong?" Kovac asked him quietly. Emir shook his head. "This place has bad energy, Lieutenant." "It's just a house, Emir." "My grandmother would say otherwise. She'd say some places remember." Dragan overheard them, and snorted. Superstitious nonsense. The only ghosts in Bosnia are the ones we carry in our heads. Emir shrugged. Perhaps. But I wouldn't dismiss the old beliefs so quickly, especially not here. He gestured to the blood-stained wall. Someone died badly in this place. People are dying badly everywhere, Luca interjected, spreading his sleeping bag near the fireplace Auntie was constructing. That's what war is. Kovac ended the conversation with a raised hand. Focus on getting dry and warm. 2-hour watch rotations tonight. I'll take first. As darkness fell completely, the storm intensified. Rain lashed against the broken windows, wind howled through the bullet holes, and thunder rolled across the valley. The soldiers huddled around the small fire, eating cold rations and drying their gear. Just as they were preparing to sleep, a strange scratching sound came from within the walls. Everyone froze. Rats, Dragon said finally. Big and rats, muttered Auntie. Kovac nodded in agreement, but noticed Emir's troubled expression. The medic was listening intently, head tilted. What is it? Kovac asked. For a moment, I thought I heard. Emir trailed off, then shook his head. Nothing. Just the storm playing tricks. But as they settled into their sleeping bags, Kovac could have sworn he heard it too beneath the howling wind and drumming rain. Something that sounded like a child crying, like distant and muffled, as if coming from very far away. Or from somewhere inside the walls. Kovac checked his watch. 23 hours. The storm continued unabated outside, rain hammering against the roof and wind whistling through the broken windows. The rest of the squad had fallen into uneasy sleep while he maintained the first watch, occasionally adding wood to their small fire. The flames cast dancing shadows across the stained walls, sometimes creating illusions of movement in the corners of his vision. A particularly loud crack of thunder made him flinch. The war had left them all with frayed nerves. 4 years of conflict had transformed Yugoslavia from a unified nation into a blood-soaked battlefield of ethnic cleansing and retribution. He ran a hand over his face, feeling the stubble of 3 days without a proper shave. At 32, he felt twice his age. Something clattered in the kitchen. Kovac rose silently, weapon ready, and moved toward the sound. The kitchen was empty, but a metal cup lay on the floor that he was certain had been on the counter earlier. He picked it up, placing it back on the table, attributing its fall to the vibrations from thunder. As he turned to leave, the cup slid across the table and fell again with a metallic ring. Kovac froze, the hairs on his neck rising. He retrieved the cup again, this time placing it inside a cabinet, closing the door firmly before returning to the main room. At 1, he woke Dragan for the second watch. Anything? The Serbian soldier asked, checking his weapon. All quiet, Kovac replied, deciding against mentioning the cup. Just the storm. Me-day. Dragan nodded, taking position near the window, while Kovac unrolled his sleeping bag near the dwindling fire. Sleep came reluctantly, punctuated by strange dreams of running through endless hallways while something pursued him. Dragan's watch passed uneventfully for the first hour. He cleaned his sidearm, keeping his mind occupied with the mechanical routine. The house creaked and moaned under the assault of the storm, but he dismissed these as normal sounds. Growing up in a rural village outside Belgrade, he was accustomed to old buildings and their noises. At approximately 2:30, the wooden rocking chair in the corner began to move. At first, Dragan thought it was a trick of the firelight, but the chair's rhythmic creaking became unmistakable. Back and forth, slowly at first, then with increasing momentum, as if an invisible occupant was rocking with growing agitation. "What the hell?" he muttered, rising to his feet. The moment he approached, the chair stopped. Dragon touched it, feeling the wood still vibrating slightly beneath his fingers. He pushed it against the wall to prevent further movement and returned to his post, unsettled but unwilling to wake the others over what must have been wind coming through the broken windows. 10 minutes later, he heard footsteps on the floor above light, like a child's moving in circles. The footsteps continued for several minutes before stopping abruptly. Dragon gripped his weapon tighter, debating whether to investigate. Training and pride won out over growing unease. He couldn't wake the squad for what was probably a stray animal that had found its way inside. When he woke Marco for the third watch, Dragon hesitated before saying, "The house makes strange noises." "Probably nothing." Marco nodded, his eyes alert despite being roused from sleep. "Old houses always do. Get some rest." Dragon settled into his sleeping bag, but rest eluded him. Every creak and groan of the house seemed amplified, and once he was certain someone whispered his name from the darkness. Marco's watch began routinely. He checked his equipment, noting with confusion that his compass and knife had somehow switched positions in his pack. He distinctly remembered placing the compass on the left side, but now it sat on the right. A minor detail, perhaps his memory playing tricks after weeks of exhaustion. At 4:15, the temperature in the room dropped dramatically. Marco's breath fogged in front of his face, despite the fire still burning low in the grate. He added more wood, but the chill persisted, seeming to emanate from the walls themselves. The photographs on the mantelpiece, dusty family portraits left behind by the house's former occupants, began to turn, one by one, facing the wall instead of the room. Marco watched, paralyzed, as the last photograph rotated slowly, deliberately, as if turned by invisible fingers. He approached the mantelpiece, heart pounding, and turned one photo back around. It showed a family: father, mother, 2 boys, and a small girl with solemn eyes. The glass of the frame was cracked diagonally across the father's face. As Marco stared at the image, he could have sworn the little girl's eyes moved to look directly at him. He dropped the photograph, the frame clattering but not breaking on the wooden floor. The sound was enough to make Emir stir and sit up. "What's wrong?" the medic asked, instantly alert. "Nothing," Marco said quickly. "Drop something, go back to sleep." But Emir was already reaching for his boots. "My watch now anyway. You look pale." "It's cold," Marco said, not mentioning the photographs or his growing certainty that they were not alone in the house. By morning, none of the soldiers had slept well. They gathered around the rekindled fire, heating water for coffee, each man showing signs of a restless night. Luca was the last to join them, his face ashen. "Found these under my sleeping bag," he said, placing several wooden floorboards on the table. Carved into the wood were strange symbols, circular patterns with lines radiating outward, reminiscent of ancient protection sigils. They were hidden under the floor right where I was sleeping. "Maybe the family was religious," Auntie suggested. "These aren't religious symbols I recognize," Emir said, examining the markings. "They look older. Folk magic, perhaps. Protection symbols." Kovac said unexpectedly. When the others looked at him, he shrugged. "My grandmother was superstitious. She carved similar marks on our door frames." "Protection from what?" Auntie asked. "Evil spirits. The restless dead." Kovac's tone was matter-of-fact, but his eyes betrayed concern. Dragon scoffed. "Peasant superstitions." "Did any of you," Marco began, then hesitated. "Did any of you notice anything strange last night?" A heavy silence fell over the group. Finally, Auntie spoke. "I had nightmares. A family screaming. Children crying. I heard footsteps upstairs," Dragon admitted reluctantly. "The rocking chair moved on its own," Luca added. I thought I was imagining it. And the photographs turned around, Marco said quietly. All eyes turned to Lieutenant Kovac, who remained silent for a moment before speaking. We're all exhausted and on edge. This house has a bad history, clearly. But we have orders to remain in position until extraction in 3 days. With respect, Lieutenant, Emir said, perhaps we should find another shelter. Kovac shook his head. The storm hasn't let up, and this is the most defensible structure for kilometers. We stay, and we stay alert. For tangible threats, not ghost stories. His tone ended the discussion, but as the soldiers dispersed to check their gear and secure the perimeter, each man cast uneasy glances at the shadows in the corners and the stains on the walls, wondering what tragedy had unfolded here and whether its echoes were truly at rest. By midday, the rain had lessened to a steady drizzle, though dark clouds suggested more severe weather would return. Kovac sent the men to explore the house more thoroughly, partly to search for useful supplies and partly to keep them occupied. Idle minds bred fear, and after the unsettling night, maintaining morale had become as important as maintaining security. Emir volunteered to check the kitchen and any storage areas for medical supplies or preserved food. The kitchen cabinets yielded little some canned goods with Cyrillic labels, their expiration dates long past. He was about to abandon his search when he noticed a slight depression in the floorboards beneath the sink. Kneeling, he pressed against the wood, feeling it give slightly. His fingers found a small metal ring nearly invisible in the floorboard seam. Pulling upward, he revealed a trapdoor leading to a cellar. "Lieutenant," he called. "Found something." Kovac appeared in the doorway. "What is it?" "Hidden cellar. Could be a shelter, could be storage." Kovac nodded. "Check it out. Take your sidearm." The wooden stairs creaked under Emir's weight as he descended into the darkness, flashlight in one hand, pistol in the other. The cellar was surprisingly large, extending beneath most of the house's main floor. Unlike the chaos above, this space seemed untouched by the violence that had swept through a time capsule of normal life before the war. Shelves lined the walls, holding preserved fruits and vegetables in glass jars. A workbench stood against one wall, children's toys scattered across its surface, half-finished wooden animals, their features lovingly carved. In one corner sat a trunk filled with family photographs and documents. Emir picked up one photo, wiping away the dust. It showed the same family from the mantelpiece photograph: father, mother, 2 boys, and the little girl, but here they were laughing, enjoying a picnic by a lake. He turned it over, finding writing on the back: Selim, Vesna, Dino, Farouk and Amila at Jablanico Lake, summer 1991. Less than a year before the war began. A noise from upstairs startled him. Pocketing the photograph, he climbed back to the kitchen. "Place is a regular bomb shelter," he reported to Kovac. "Food stores, family belongings. Looks like they left in a hurry or never made it down there." Before Kovac could respond, Marco entered from the front room. "Someone's coming up the road." Elderly woman, alone. They moved to the windows, watching as an old woman in a headscarf slowly approached the house, leaning heavily on a wooden walking stick. Her clothes were worn but clean, her face deeply lined with age and hardship. "I'll talk to her," Emir volunteered. "Find out if she knows anything about this place." Kovac nodded. "Be careful. Could be a setup." Emir stepped onto the porch as the woman reached the gate. She stopped, eyeing him warily. "Good day, grandmother," he called in Bosnian, using the respectful term for an elderly woman. "Don't be afraid. We're soldiers of the Bosnian Defense Forces." The woman squinted at him. "I'm not afraid of much anymore, young man. I've seen too much." Her accent marked her as local. I saw someone had taken shelter here. Came to warn you. Warn us about what? This house. The Miak house. You shouldn't stay here after dark. Emir glanced back at the building. You knew the family? The woman's face softened with sorrow. The Miaks. Good people. Selim was Muslim, his wife Vesna was Serbian. Their children were beautiful. She crossed herself. What happened to them was a sin before God. What did happen? Emir asked gently. Early in the war, paramilitaries came through. They were making examples of mixed families, called them traitors to their people. Her voice hardened. They took Selim and the boys first, shot them in the garden. Then they took Vesna inside, did terrible things before they killed her. And the girl? Amila? Emir asked, remembering the name from the photograph. The woman's eyes widened. How do you know her name? Found a family photograph. She nodded slowly. Amila hid in the cellar. They didn't find her, but she saw everything through the floorboards, the cracks. She pointed to her eyes. These eyes saw her 2 days later, wandering the village. I tried to catch her, to help her, but she ran into the forest. They searched, but she shook her head. Some say she died of exposure. Others say worse things found her. What do you believe happened to her? The woman's gaze returned to the house, her expression darkening. I believe she never left this place. Not really. She lowered her voice. There are sounds at night. A child crying, things moving without hands touching them. You believe the house is haunted by her spirit. Not just haunted, young man. Cursed. She gripped her walking stick tighter. Amila loved her family. To see them die that way, it changes something in a person, in a soul. Dia. From the doorway, Dragon called out impatiently, "What's she saying, Emir?" The old woman's eyes snapped to Dragon, narrowing as she took in his features. Serbian, she said flatly. Yes, Emir admitted. We're a mixed unit, like Bosnia itself. She spat on the ground. The men who killed the Miak spoke with his accent. Emir stepped between them. That was years ago, grandmother. Different men. She studied him, then nodded slightly. Perhaps. But the dead don't always make such distinctions. She turned to leave. Don't stay after dark. Amila's anger doesn't discriminate anymore. Wait, Emir called. Do you know which paramilitary unit it was? The ones who came here? The woman paused. They called themselves the Wolves. Their leader had a scar, here. She traced a line from her left eye to her jaw. I will light a candle for you, soldier. You'll need God's protection in that house. They watched her shuffle away down the muddy road, disappearing around a bend. Inside, Emir relayed the conversation to the squad gathered around the kitchen table. As he spoke, the atmosphere in the room grew heavier, the soldiers exchanging uneasy glances. The Wolves, Kovac repeated when Emir finished. I've heard of them. Notorious Serbian paramilitary, responsible for several massacres in this region. All eyes turned to Dragon, the squad's only Serbian member. What? He demanded defensively. You think I know them? That I approve of murdering children? No one's accusing you, Dragon, Kovac said calmly. Aren't they? Dragon stood abruptly. I see how you all look at me. Serbian. So I must be a butcher, right? Stand down, soldier, Kovac ordered. My family fled Sarajevo. When the shelling started, Dragon continued, ignoring the command. My sister was killed by a Bosniak sniper. You think I don't know what it's like to lose family to the war? We've all lost people, Marco interjected. That's not the point. Then what is the point? Dragon demanded. The point, Emir said quietly, is that a child died horribly in this house. And now strange things are happening. That's the point. Luca, who had remained silent until now, spoke up. It's just a story. An old woman's superstition. Then explain the symbols under the floorboards. Auntie challenged. Explain the noises, the moving objects. Old house, storm, frayed nerves, Luca countered, but his voice lacked conviction. Enough, Kovac said firmly. We have orders to remain until extraction. 3 more nights. We'll maintain double watches, keep the fire going, and stay alert. That's all we can do. As darkness fell, the squad gathered in the main room, none eager to be alone in the house. They cleaned weapons, played cards, and shared rations, normal activities that felt like a thin veneer over growing tension. The storm returned with renewed fury, wind howling around the eaves and rain pounding the roof. Just as they were preparing sleeping arrangements for the night, a new sound cut through the storm noise, clear, unmistakable, and chilling to every man present. A child's voice, singing softly. The lullaby was a traditional Bosnian song, one that mothers across the region had sung to their children for generations. The sweet, sad melody floated through the house, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Spavash, spavash, zlato moji, the voice sang. Sleep, sleep, my golden one. Tivoja machka bdi, your mother keeps watch. The soldiers sat frozen, eyes wide, as the lullaby continued, the child's voice sometimes breaking with emotion, sometimes fading entirely before returning stronger. No one spoke, no one moved, until the song finally trailed off into silence. In the quiet that followed, Auntie whispered what they were all thinking. Amila. Emir reached into his pocket and withdrew the photograph he'd taken from the cellar. He placed it on the table, the smiling family looking up at them, the mother, the father, the 2 boys, and little Amila with her solemn eyes. She's still here, he said simply, and she knows we are too. Morning arrived with leaden skies but temporarily diminished rain. The soldiers moved through their routines mechanically, each man hollow-eyed from another night of minimal sleep and disturbing dreams. No one mentioned the lullaby from the previous evening, as if speaking of it might summon more phenomena none were prepared to face. Kovac gathered them after a cold breakfast. We need supplies. The storms let up enough for a patrol to the village center. Might find a market or storage we can salvage from. We're really staying then? Auntie asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. Orders are orders, Kovac replied firmly. Marco, Luca, you'll come with me. The rest of you secure the house. Try to patch those broken windows. Weather report says the worst of the storm returns tonight. As the patrol prepared to depart, Emir approached Kovac privately. Lieutenant, about last night. Not now, Emir. We need to discuss what's happening here. That singing. Was the wind, Kovac interrupted, or someone in the village playing games with us? You don't believe that. Kovac checked his weapon, avoiding Emir's gaze. What I believe doesn't matter. What matters is maintaining unit cohesion and completing our mission. Ghost stories don't help with either. And if it's not just stories, Kovac finally met his eyes. Then there's nothing we can do about it anyway. Focus on what you can control. Emir, that's an order. The patrol departed, leaving Emir, Dragon, and Auntie to work on the house. Dragon found wooden boards in a shed and began covering the broken windows while Auntie reinforced the doors. Emir searched for additional supplies, eventually returning to the cellar, drawn by the family belongings stored there. He examined the documents from the trunk: birth certificates, school records, family photographs. The Mihiks had been educated people. Selim had been a mathematics teacher, Vesna a nurse. Their sons, Dino and Farouk, had been 14 and 12 when they died. Amila had been only 7. A small notebook caught his attention, a child's diary with a pink cover. Opening it revealed childish handwriting and drawings. Amila's journal. Most entries were innocent observations about school, friends, and family life. The final entry, dated April 14th, 1992, reads simply, "Papa says we might have to leave soon. There is fighting in the city. I don't want to leave my room and my toys." They never got the chance to leave. Upstairs, Dragon had finished boarding the windows and was checking his rifle when he noticed something strange. The weapon had been disassembled. The bolt, magazine, and firing pin lay arranged on the table in a pattern resembling a children's hopscotch grid. "What the hell?" he muttered, certain he hadn't taken the rifle apart. He quickly reassembled it, hands shaking slightly. In the kitchen, Auntie was startled by a cabinet door slamming shut. When he opened it to investigate, all the dishes inside had been stacked in a precarious tower that collapsed with a crash when the door opened. "Dragon?" he called. "Did you mess with the dishes?" "Why would I do that?" Dragon's voice came from the other room. As Auntie bent to clean up the broken dishes, he felt a cold breath on the back of his neck. Spinning around, he found the kitchen empty, but on the dusty floor were small, bare footprints that hadn't been there moments before. Child-sized footprints, leading from the cellar door to the hallway, then vanishing. Emir emerged from the cellar clutching Amila's diary just as a violent bang echoed through the house. The 3 soldiers converged in the main room to find all the chairs overturned and dead. The family photographs they'd carefully replaced on the mantelpiece, now arranged in a circle on the floor, all facing inward. "This isn't happening," Dragon said, his voice strained. "This can't be happening." "It is happening," Emir replied quietly. "And I think it's going to get worse." Outside, the sky darkened prematurely as the storm clouds thickened. Wind rose again, howling around the eaves. The temperature in the house plummeted suddenly, their breath fogging in the cold air. "We need to leave," Auntie said. "Now, before the lieutenant returns. This place isn't safe." "And go where?" Dragon demanded. "Into the storm. The nearest friendly position is 20 kilometers away." "Anywhere is better than." Auntie's words cut off as a child's handprint appeared on the window beside him, pressed from the outside despite the second-story height. The condensation from the print trickled downward like blood. The front door burst open with a bang, admitting Kovac, Marco, and Luca, their arms full of salvaged supplies. They stopped short at the scene before them: the overturned furniture, the circle of photographs, and their 3 comrades standing pale-faced in the center of the room. "What happened?" Kovac demanded. Before anyone could answer, every door in the house slammed simultaneously. The wooden boards covering the windows rattled violently, as if struck by invisible fists. From upstairs came the sound of furniture being dragged across the floor. "It started again," Emir said unnecessarily. Kovac dropped his supplies and drew his sidearm, though what he intended to shoot remained unclear. "Report. Now." Dragon, his earlier skepticism evaporated, spoke rapidly. "It's escalating, Lieutenant. My rifle was disassembled. Footprints appeared from nowhere. The photographs arranged themselves. We need to leave," Auntie repeated desperately. "Calm down, all of you," Kovac ordered, though his own face had lost color. "Marco, try the radio. See if we can get headquarters. Request early extraction." Marco nodded, setting up the field radio. He extended the antenna, adjusted the frequency, and attempted to establish contact. Static filled the room, punctuated by bursts of unintelligible sound. Vatra base, this is Sokol Squad. Do you copy? Marco repeated several times, adjusting the tuning between attempts. The static suddenly cleared, replaced by a child's voice, distorted but recognizable. Palmazite me. Help me. What the hell? Marco whispered, dropping the handset. The voice continued through the radio speaker. Palmazite my. Vidim vas. Help me. I see you. Turn it off, Luca said hoarsely. Marco complied, but the voice continued for several seconds after the power was cut before fading to silence. In the quiet that followed, Kovac made a decision. We'll leave at first light. Storm or no storm. I don't care about the extraction schedule anymore. And tonight? Emir asked. We stay together. One room. Weapons ready. Double watch. As if in response to their plans, a new sound filled the house, the soft, wet slap of something being painted onto the wall. They turned to find blood-red letters appearing on the living room wall, forming words in a childish hand. Precasno. Too late. The patrol's salvage supplies had scattered across the floor when Kovac dropped them. Now they began to rise cans, packages, tools hovering momentarily before flying across the room with violent force. The soldiers ducked as the objects became projectiles, smashing into walls and furniture. Upstairs, Kovac shouted over the chaos, Now! Now! They retreated to the second floor, taking refuge in what had once been the parents' bedroom. Kovac and Luca pushed a heavy wardrobe against the door while the others checked the windows for possible escape routes. The roof's too steep for a safe descent, Marco reported grimly. We'd break our necks in this weather. The assault downstairs continued, crashes and bangs as furniture was thrown about, glass breaking, wood splintering, the sounds of systematic destruction. What does it want? Luca asked, his earlier skepticism completely gone. Why is it attacking us? Emir held up Amila's diary. She watched her family die, violently, at the hands of soldiers, but we didn't do it. Auntie protested. We weren't even here. Maybe to her, all soldiers are the same now, Emir suggested. Or maybe she's just angry, lost, confused. Dragan had grown increasingly pale during this exchange. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his hands. Not all soldiers, he said quietly. The others turned to him. What do you mean? Kovac asked. Not all soldiers are the same to her. Dragan looked up, his eyes haunted. I think she knows exactly who's responsible. Before he could elaborate, bloody handprints began appearing on the wall, small, child-sized prints that smeared downward. The temperature dropped further, frost forming on the windows despite the spring season. The wardrobe blocking the door began to shake, then inch away from the entrance despite its weight. The door itself rattled violently, as if something was trying to force its way in. Amila, Emir called out, his voice shaking but determined. Amila Miek. We know what happened to you, to your family. We're sorry. The assault on the door paused briefly before resuming with greater force. We're not them. Emir continued desperately. We're not the ones who hurt you. The door splintered at the hinges. Tell her the truth, Dragan, Marco said suddenly, his eyes fixed on their Serbian comrade. Tell her who you really are. All eyes turned to Dragan, who sat motionless, tears streaming down his face as the door began to break apart under the invisible assault. The bedroom door exploded inward, wood fragments scattering across the floor. The soldiers braced for an assault, weapons raised despite the futility of bullets against their unseen tormentor. But the doorway remained empty. The violent activity ceased abruptly, leaving an eerie silence broken only by their ragged breathing. "What just happened?" Auntie whispered. No one answered. The quiet felt more threatening than the previous chaos, as if whatever force controlled the house was gathering its strength for something worse. Kovac was the first to recover. "We need to understand what we're dealing with." "Emir, what else did you find in the cellar?" "Anything that might explain this." Emir shook his head. "Just family belongings. Photos, documents, the diary." He hesitated. "And this." He produced a small cloth doll from his pocket, handmade, with button eyes and yarn hair. "I think it was Amila's." The moment the doll appeared, the temperature in the room plummeted further. Frost spread across the windows in fern-like patterns, and their breath clouded heavily in the frigid air. "She knows we have it," Marco said quietly. Luca, standing nearest the shattered doorway, suddenly stiffened. "There is someone in the hallway." They followed his gaze. In the shadows beyond the door stood what appeared to be a small figure, the indistinct outline of a child. It remained motionless, watching them before melting back into darkness. "Amila," Emir called softly, "we won't hurt you." No response came from the hallway, but a floorboard creaked, as if under a light step moving away. "I think she wants us to follow," Emir said. "That's insane," Luca protested. "We should stay together, barricade ourselves in." "That didn't work very well last time," Marco pointed out. Kovac made the decision. "We follow. Carefully. Keep formation. If this is our chance to understand what's happening, we take it." They moved into the hallway, weapons ready, following the occasional creaking floorboard that suggested a path. The presence led them to a small bedroom at the end of the hall, a child's room, with faded pink walls and a small bed. Unlike the rest of the house, this room appeared untouched by violence or decay, preserved like a shrine. On the bed lay a partially burned photograph. Marco approached cautiously and picked it up. The image showed the Miak family standing in front of their house, father Selim with his arm around mother Vesna, sons Dino and Farouk standing proudly, and little Amila in front, smiling shyly. One corner of the photograph was blackened and curled from fire damage. The moment Marco's fingers touched the photograph, he gasped and went rigid, his eyes widening in shock. "Marco?" Kovac moved toward him. "What's wrong?" Marco didn't respond. He stood frozen, staring unseeing at the photograph, his breathing rapid and shallow. In Marco's mind, the present faded away. Suddenly, he was standing not in the abandoned house of 1995, but in the same location 3 years earlier. The house was intact, lights glowing warmly in the windows. He watched, a helpless observer, as 3 military vehicles pulled up outside. 3 men in mixed uniforms, some military, some civilian clothes with military accessories poured out, carrying weapons. Their leader had a distinctive scar running from his left eye down to his jaw, exactly as the old woman had described. He barked orders, and his men surrounded the house. Marco tried to shout, to warn the family inside, but no sound emerged from his lips. He was a ghost in this memory, unable to affect events already long past. The men kicked in the door. Screams erupted from inside a woman's voice, children crying. Selim Mehik was dragged into the front yard, followed by his sons. They were forced to their knees as the mother and Amila were held inside. "Please," Selim begged. "My children have done nothing. My wife is Serbian, like you. She married a Muslim," the scarred leader spat. "She's a traitor to her people." The execution was swift 3 shots that dropped father and sons to the muddy ground. Inside, Vesna's screams turned to pleading, then to pain. Marco couldn't bear to watch what happened next, but he couldn't look away, forced to witness every moment of the atrocity. Through a crack in the floorboards, he caught a glimpse of small fingers and a child's eye, Emila, hiding in the cellar beneath, watching her family die. After the men had finished with Vesna, they ransacked the house, taking valuables, destroying what they couldn't carry. One man found a family photograph and held it to a candle, laughing as it began to burn. He dropped it when the flame reached his fingers, and it fell beneath a cabinet. As the paramilitaries prepared to leave, the scarred leader gave one final order: burn it, leave no trace. But they were sloppy in their work, drunk on violence and looted Rakija. The fire they set damaged only part of the house before the rain extinguished it. They left without checking if the structure had been completely destroyed. They never found Emila in the cellar. Marco gasped as the vision released him, stumbling backward until he hit the wall, the photograph falling from his trembling fingers. "What happened?" Emir asked, reaching for him. "What did you see?" "Everything," Marco whispered, his face ashen. "I saw everything. What they did to this family." He looked up, meeting the eyes of his comrades. She was under the floor, watching. A 7-year-old girl, watching her family being murdered. Silence fell as the implications of his words sank in. "The photograph showed you this?" Kovac asked skeptically. "Not showed. I experienced it. I was there." Marco's voice broke. The leader had a scar, just like the old woman said, from his eye to his jaw. At this description, Dragon made a small, involuntary sound. The others turned to him. "You recognize him," Emir said. It wasn't a question. Before Dragon could respond, a new manifestation began. The walls of the small bedroom became covered with childish drawings that appeared as if an invisible hand was creating them in real-time, crude figures representing a family. Soldiers with guns, red crayon blood splashing across the scenes. The images told the story of the Miek family's final moments in simple, horrifying detail. The last drawing to appear showed a small figure hiding beneath floorboards, tears streaming from oversized eyes, while above her, stick figures representing her family lay surrounded by red. Beneath this image, a word appeared, scrawled in a child's uneven handwriting. Pravda. Justice. She wants justice, Emir translated unnecessarily. For her family, Kovac said. No, Marco corrected, his eyes fixed on Dragon. She wants justice from those responsible. Don't you, Dragon? All eyes turned to their Serbian comrade, who had pressed himself against the far wall, his face a mask of terror and guilt. What does he mean, Dragon? Kovac demanded. Dragon shook his head, unable to speak. The old woman said it was Serbian paramilitaries. The wolves, Luka recalled, with the scarred leader. Vuk Stanik, Dragon whispered the name. That was his name. How do you know that? Kovac asked, his voice dangerous now. Everyone knew of the wolves. They were notorious. That doesn't explain how you recognize a description of their leader, Marco pressed. The room's temperature dropped further. The drawings on the walls began to bleed, red crayon turning to actual blood that trickled down the faded pink paint. In the corner of the room, the indistinct figure of a small girl appeared again, more solid than before, watching them with hollow eyes. Tell them, Dragon, Marco insisted. Tell them, or I think she'll make you tell. Dragon looked at the apparition, then back at his comrades, the squad that had fought alongside him for 2 years. The men who had saved his life, whose lives he had saved in turn. His voice, when it finally came, was barely audible. "I was here," he confessed. 3 years ago, I was one of the wolves." The confession hung in the air like a physical thing, heavy and poisonous. No one moved. Even the supernatural manifestations paused, as if the house itself was holding its breath. "You were part of this." Kovac finally broke the silence, gesturing to the bloody drawings on the walls. "Part of murdering this family?" Dragon's face contorted with anguish. "I was 19. Just a kid myself. They recruited me from a refugee camp after my sister was killed." His eyes pleaded for understanding. "I didn't know what we were doing until we got here. I swear." "Bullshit," Auntie spat. "You knew exactly what the wolves were." "Everyone did." "I thought we were fighting for our people." Dragon's voice rose defensively. "For protection against what happened to my family. Stanek said we were preventing another genocide, this time against Serbs. By murdering children," Emir asked quietly. Dragon flinched, as if struck. I wasn't the one who," he trailed off, unable to complete the denial. The ghostly figure of Amila moved closer, her form becoming more defined with each passing moment. They could now make out the details of her face, solemn eyes and a pale face framed by dark hair. She wore the same dress as in the family photograph, but it was stained with what appeared to be blood. "She recognizes you," Marco said. Dragon nodded miserably. "I was the youngest. They made me stand guard while the others," he couldn't finish the sentence. "You stood guard," Kovac repeated, his voice cold, "while they executed a father and his sons. While they raped and murdered a mother. While a 7-year-old girl watched it all happen from beneath the floorboards." "What was I supposed to do?" Dragon cried. "They would have killed me too." "You could have warned the family," Luca suggested. "Created a distraction. Anything." "I was a coward," Dragon admitted, tears streaming down his face. "I've lived with that knowledge every day since. Why do you think I joined the defense forces? Why do you think I've risked my life for this country? For all of you." "Redemption," Emir said softly. "Or hiding," Marco countered. "Burying your past." The house began to shake, a low rumble building beneath their feet. Plaster cracked and fell from the ceiling. The bloody drawings on the walls began to swirl and merge, forming new images. Dragon in his current uniform, but with blood on his hands. "She doesn't care about your redemption," Kovac realized. "She wants vengeance." Dragon sank to his knees as his pack flew open, its contents scattering across the floor. A child's drawing appeared among them, crude but unmistakable, depicting soldiers shooting a family. The same drawing that had been described in the outline but hadn't actually appeared until now. "I didn't keep that," Dragon protested, staring at the drawing. "That's not mine." "It is now," Emir said grimly. The ghost child Amila moved toward Dragon, her small hand outstretched. Where she walked, the floorboards creaked and frosted over. The air around her shimmered like heat waves, though the temperature continued to drop. "What do we do?" Auntie asked desperately, looking to Kovac. "Lieutenant?" Kovac's face was a study in conflicted emotions: anger at Dragon's deception, fear of the supernatural force confronting them, and the ingrained duty to protect his men, even those who might not deserve protection. "We need to get out of here," he decided. "All of us." "She won't let us leave," Marco said. "Not with him." "Then, what do you suggest?" Kovac demanded. "That we sacrifice him? Hand over one of our own to a ghost? He's not one of our own." Auntie shouted. "He's one of them. A war criminal." "I was following orders," Dragon protested weakly. The defense used at Nuremberg, Emir noted coldly. The apparition of Amila now stood directly before Dragon. Despite her small size, her presence dominated the room. The air around her distorted, and for brief moments they could see flashes of another form superimposed over the child, something darker, twisted by rage and pain, barely recognizable as human. Amila, Emir addressed the ghost directly. We understand your pain, your anger. What happened to you and your family was unforgivable. The ghost's head turned toward him, hollow eyes fixing on his face. But we can bring him to justice, Emir continued. Real justice. A tribunal. He'll answer for his crimes before the world. The ghost tilted her head, considering. For a moment, the violent phenomena subsided slightly. That's right. Kovac picked up the thread. We have laws now. Systems to punish those who committed atrocities. Let us take him to face judgment. Dragon looked up, momentary hope crossing his features. Yes, I'll confess everything. All of it. The names of the others, what we did, all of it. The ghost child stared at him, then slowly shook her head. The message was clear. Human justice was insufficient for what had been done. Please, Dragon begged. I have a family now, a son. He's only 4. At the mention of a child, Amila's form flickered violently. The rage emanating from her intensified, sending objects flying around the room. How dare he claim the family life he had stolen from her? That was the wrong thing to say, Marco muttered. Invisible forces seized Dragon, lifting him from his knees and pinning him against the wall. He struggled against the unseen grip, feet dangling above the floor. Red marks appeared on his face, 3 parallel lines on each cheek, as if invisible claws were raking his skin. Stop, Kovac commanded, drawing his sidearm and aiming it uselessly around the room. Let him go. Go. Lieutenant, Emir said urgently. Your gun won't help. We need to give her what she wants. And what's that? His life. No, Emir said thoughtfully. Not his life. His truth. His confession. He turned to the apparition, Amila. You want him to feel what you felt, and to understand what he did. The ghost child turned to Emir, her expression unreadable. Let him experience it, Emir suggested. Like Marco did with the photograph. Show him everything. Make him witness it as you did. The scratching on Dragon's face paused. The ghost seemed to consider this proposal. No, Dragon gasped. Please, no. But Amila had already made her decision. She floated toward him, her small hand reaching out to touch his forehead. The moment contact was made, Dragon screamed a sound of pure anguish that chilled the blood of every man present. His body went rigid, eyes wide and unseeing, fixed on horrors only he could perceive. Tears and blood mingled on his face as he was forced to experience the Miek family's final hours from Amila's perspective, hiding in terror beneath the floorboards. Watching through the cracks as her father and brothers were executed, hearing her mother's screams. Feeling the overwhelming fear and grief that had ultimately claimed her own life. The other soldiers watched in horrified silence as Dragon lived through Amila's trauma. Minutes stretched like hours, his screams eventually giving way to broken sobbing. When the ghost finally released him, he collapsed to the floor, curling into a fetal position, his body shaking with the aftershocks of what he had experienced. Now you understand, Emir said quietly. Now you've felt what she felt. Dragon couldn't speak, could only weep. The ghost child stood over him, her expression softening slightly from rage to something more complex, a mixture of vindication and lingering sorrow. Amila, Kovac addressed the apparition. He's seen it now. Felt it. Is that enough? Will you let us leave? The ghost turned to him, then looked around at each soldier in turn, as if assessing their worthiness to depart. Her gaze lingered longest on Emir, who had shown her the most understanding. Slowly, she moved to the center of the room and raised her small hands. The bloody drawings on the walls began to change again, forming words. Pravda nije završena. Justice is not finished. What does she mean? Luka asked. What more does she want? The others, Marco realized. The rest of the wolves, Stanek, Mani. Dragon managed to push himself to a sitting position, his face streaked with blood from the spectral scratches. They're still out there, he confirmed, voice hoarse from screaming. Stanek and at least 4 others who were here that day. The ghost nodded, confirming his words. You want us to find them, Emir said to Amila, to make them face justice too. Again, the child nodded. We can do that, Kovac said with newfound determination. Dragon will testify, identify them. We'll make sure they answer for what they did here. The ghost studied him, seeming to gauge his sincerity. Then, slowly, the violent energy that had filled the house began to subside. The temperature gradually rose. The blood on the walls dried and flaked away, revealing the faded pink paint beneath. Amila's form became more transparent, fading by degrees. Before she disappeared completely, she moved to the small bed and gestured toward it. Emir approached cautiously and looked where she indicated. Beneath the pillow lay a small, tarnished locket. He picked it up and opened it. Inside was a tiny photograph of the Miak family, all smiling together. We'll remember them, Emir promised, closing his hand around the locket. And we'll make sure others remember too. The ghost gave one final nod before fading from view entirely. The house settled into silence, not the threatening quiet of before, but a peaceful stillness that suggested the vengeful presence had been appeased, at least temporarily. Is it over? Auntie whispered after several minutes had passed without incident. For now, Kovac said, holstering his weapon, but we have a promise to keep. He turned to Dragon, who remained on the floor, a broken man. Not just physically, the experience had shattered something fundamental within him. You'll face a tribunal, Kovac told him, his tone leaving no room for argument. You'll name names. Identify the others. Testify to everything you saw and did. Dragon nodded weakly. Yes, everything. We'll need to restrain him, Marco said. I won't resist, Dragon assured them. Not anymore. But as they bound Dragon's hands, the first light of dawn filtered through the frost-covered windows. The storm had finally passed, leaving a clear sky in its wake. They gathered their equipment in silence, each man lost in his own thoughts about what they had witnessed. Before leaving, Emir returned to Amila's room one last time. He placed her cloth doll carefully on the small bed, positioning it as if it were sleeping peacefully. Rest now, he whispered. Justice will come. As they departed the house with their prisoner, none of them noticed the small face watching from an upstairs window, or the child's handprint that appeared briefly in the condensation before fading away. The Miak house stood silent once more, waiting for the rest of its justice to be fulfilled. Dawn of the third day broke with deceptive calm. Pale sunlight filtered through the frost-covered windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floors. The squad had managed a few hours of uneasy sleep after Dragon's confession and subsequent restraint. He sat now against the wall, wrists bound, eyes vacant and haunted. Storm's moving back in, Marco announced, studying the darkening horizon through a gap in the boarded windows. Looks worse than before. Kovac nodded grimly. Let's use this window of calm. Emir, check our supplies. Luka, get the radio working. We need extraction as soon as possible. As the men dispersed to their tasks, the house seemed to exhale around them. Dust motes danced in the sunbeams, and the floorboards creaked with subtle shifts. Though Amila's presence had receded after Dragon's confession, none of them believed she was truly gone. Luka fiddled with the radio, adjusting dials and extending the antenna. Vatra base, this is Sokol Squad, requesting immediate extraction. Do you copy? Ayan. Static hissed from the speaker before a garbled voice broke through. Cole Squad, position. Over. We're at grid coordinates 441827 north, 184253 east. Abandoned village approximately 20 kilometers southwest of checkpoint Delta. Request immediate extraction. We have a situation. Luka glanced at Dragon. Negative. Extraction. Storm system. Grounded tomorrow earliest. Repeat last transmission. Luka requested urgently. The voice came through clearer this time. Negative on immediate extraction. Storm system has grounded all helicopters. Tomorrow earliest possible pickup. Maintain position and stand by. Luka set down the handset with a defeated sigh. They can't come until tomorrow at the earliest. Helicopters are grounded because of the approaching storm. Perfect, Auntie muttered. Another night in the haunted house with a war criminal. Keep your voice down, Kovac warned, glancing at Dragon. We don't need to antagonize anyone living or dead. As if responding to his words, the temperature in the room plummeted. Their breath clouded before their faces, and frost patterns spread across the interior walls like reaching fingers. She heard us, Emir said quietly. The first physical manifestation began subtly. A chair slid 3 inches to the left. A cup on the table rotated 180 degrees. The soldiers watched, paralyzed, as objects throughout the room made small, deliberate movements. Then came the escalation. The front door, which they'd left unlocked for quick escape, swung shut with a decisive bang. The lock clicked, followed by the sound of a heavy piece of furniture dragging across the floor in the adjacent room, barricading the exit. What's happening? Ante asked, panic edging his voice. She doesn't want us to leave, Marco realized. Not yet. Luka rushed to the nearest window, attempting to pull away the boards they'd nailed in place. The nails held fast, refusing to budge no matter how hard he pulled. They won't come loose. One by one, they tried each potential exit doors, windows, even a small rear entrance to the kitchen. All had been secured by invisible forces, the house sealing itself around them. We're trapped, Ante concluded, his face pale. Dragon laughed bitterly from his corner. Of course we are. She's not finished with me yet. What does she want now? Luka demanded. You confessed. You're going to testify. What more can she want? The answer came in a series of thunderous bangs from upstairs, rhythmic, insistent pounding that shook dust from the ceiling. I think she's calling us, Emir said, staring up at the source of the noise. We're not going up there, Ante protested. Kovac checked his weapon, a futile gesture against their supernatural captor. We don't have a choice. Either we go to her, or she'll come to us, and I suspect we won't like the latter option. They ascended the stairs in tight formation, Dragon in the middle with Kovac gripping his arm. The pounding led them to a small room they hadn't explored before, a storage closet at the end of the hallway, its door now vibrating with each impact from within. Open it, Kovac ordered. Marco reached for the handle, hesitated, then pulled the door open in one swift motion. Instead of a closet, They found themselves staring at a narrow set of stairs leading up to what must have been a hidden attic space. The pounding had stopped, replaced by an expectant silence. "She wants us to go up there," Emir said. One by one, they climbed the cramped staircase, emerging into a low-ceiling crawl space that ran the length of the house. Dust and cobwebs covered everything, undisturbed for years, except for a clear path that led to the center of the space, where a small beam of light filtered through a crack in the roof. Beneath that light lay a bundle wrapped in a decaying blanket. "Oh God," Emir whispered, approaching the bundle slowly. With trembling hands, he pulled back the blanket to reveal what they all feared: the skeletal remains of a small child. Amila's remains. Her bones were arranged as if she had curled up in sleep, or perhaps to hide. Dark stains on the blanket, and the wooden boards beneath suggested she had been wounded. She had hidden here, in this secret space, and eventually died from her injuries. Clutched in the small skeletal hands was a blood-stained doll, not the cloth doll Emir had found, but a porcelain one with a cracked face and empty eyes. "She hid," Luca said, voice breaking. "She was hurt, and she hid, and no one found her." "She bled out," Emir confirmed, examining the remains with professional detachment that didn't quite mask his horror. "Probably a stray bullet when they killed her mother. She climbed up here to hide and died alone," Kovac finished, his face grim, terrified, and in pain. Dragan had collapsed to his knees at the sight of the remains, sobbing uncontrollably. "We searched the house," he choked out. "Stanek ordered us to make sure no one survived. I checked the cellar, the bedrooms. I never knew about this place." "You wouldn't have helped her anyway," Marco said coldly. "I don't know," Dragan replied, his voice hollow. "I don't know what I would have done." As they stood in horrified silence, the house began to change around them. The temperature dropped further until their breath formed crystals in the air. The walls seemed to pulse like a living thing. From below came sounds of furniture moving, not violently thrown but deliberately arranged. "What's happening now?" Ante asked. "The house is coming alive," Emir said. They descended from the attic to find the interior transformed. Furniture had been arranged to block all exits more thoroughly. Windows that had merely been boarded were now sealed with what appeared to be solid wall where glass had once been. The interior doors had vanished, rooms flowing into one another in impossible ways. In the main room, the radio crackled to life without anyone touching it. A voice their commander at headquarters came through with surprising clarity. "Repeat, extraction scheduled for 0600 tomorrow. Confirm receipt of transmission." Luca lunged for the handset. "Vatra base, this is Sokol squad. We need immediate extraction. We are in danger at our current position." "Nature of danger? Are you under enemy fire?" Luca looked helplessly at Kovac. How could they explain their situation? Kovac took the handset. "Vatra base, we have discovered evidence of war crimes at this location. We have a security situation with one of our squad members. Request priority extraction." Static filled the channel before the reply came. "Understood, Sokol. But storm conditions make immediate extraction impossible. All aircraft grounded. Maintain position. Secure your prisoner if necessary. Make extraction at earliest possible window." The radio died abruptly, the power light fading despite fresh batteries. "We're on our own," Kovac concluded, setting down the useless handset. The house shuddered around them, and the temperature plunged to freezing. Ice crystals formed on the walls, spreading in patterns that resembled childish drawing stick figures of a family, soldiers with guns, a small figure hiding. In the center of the room, the air shimmered and distorted. Ghostly figures began to materialize, transparent, flickering like old film projections. The Miak family appeared before them, Selim standing protectively in front of Vesna, the boys huddled behind their mother, and little Amila clinging to her skirt. The apparitions replayed their final moments in fragmented, stuttering motions. Selim pleading, being dragged away, Vesna screaming as hands seized her. The boys trying to fight before being overpowered. Amila breaking free, running, disappearing through a wall, escaping to her attic hiding place. Throughout the ghostly reenactment, shadowy figures representing the paramilitaries moved with mechanical precision. One figure stood apart, watching without participating, younger, hesitant. "Dragon." "Make it stop," Dragon begged, trying to look away but finding himself unable to move his head. "Please make it stop." The ghostly scene paused, all figures freezing in place except for Amila's. Her translucent form separated from the tableau and approached Dragon. Though her face was indistinct, her rage was palpable, a physical force that pressed against them all. With sudden violence, Dragon was yanked from the group by invisible hands. He flew across the room as if pulled by wires, crashing into a wall before being dragged through a doorway that hadn't existed moments before. The door slammed shut behind him, cutting off his terrified scream. "Dragon," Kovac shouted, rushing to the door and pulling at the handle. It refused to budge. "Help me get this open." The squad attacked the door with everything they had: shoulders, boots, even firing around at the lock, which merely flattened against the wood without penetrating. Nothing affected the supernatural barrier. From beyond the door came Dragon's voice, high with terror. "She's showing me everything. Making me feel it. Their fear, their pain. Oh God, make it stop." His pleas dissolved into agonized screams that echoed throughout the house. "We have to help him," Luca insisted. "How?" Marco demanded. "What can we possibly do against this?" Emir had been standing still, watching the ghostly figures of the Miak family, which remained frozen in their moment of terror. He approached them slowly, hand outstretched toward Amila's translucent form. "Amila," he said softly, "I understand your anger, your need for justice. But this," he gestured toward the door where Dragon's screams continued, "this won't bring your family back." The ghost child's form flickered, her featureless face turning toward him. "Revenge isn't justice," Emir continued. "It's just more pain, more suffering. Hasn't there been enough of that in this house? In this country?" For a moment, the screams beyond the door subsided. The ghostly figures wavered, transparency increasing as if considering dissolution. Then Dragon's voice came again, not screaming now but speaking rapidly, desperately. "I'll tell you where to find them. Stanik is in Belgrade. Petrovic went to Montenegro. Lukic is still fighting with the Serbian forces near Srebrenica. I know where they all are. I'll help you find them." The ghost child's form solidified again, her attention diverted from Emir to the door behind which Dragon was held. That's what she really wants, Kovac realized. Information. The means to find the others responsible. The house shook violently, plaster falling from the ceiling, floorboards warping. The door containing Dragon burst open, and he tumbled out, curled into a fetal position, sobbing uncontrollably. Amila's ghost stood over him, more solid now than they had yet seen her, a small girl in a blood-stained dress, her face still indistinct but her posture radiating cold fury. Kovac approached carefully, hands raised in a placating gesture. "Amila, we understand now. You want all of them to pay for what happened here, not just Dragon." The ghost nodded slowly. "My grandmother," Kovac said, his voice softening, "used to tell me stories about spirits who couldn't rest because of injustice done to them. She said they needed acknowledgement, witnesses, someone to hear their truth." Amila's form flickered, her attention caught. "We can be your witnesses." Kovac continued. We can acknowledge what happened here. And we can bring those responsible to justice, real justice, before the law, where the whole world will know what they did. The ghost child considered his words, her form shifting between the innocent girl she had been and something darker, twisted by rage and pain. But we need to do it properly, Kovac pressed, sensing an opening. Through testimony, evidence, a tribunal where the guilty are judged by laws that represent all people, not just one side's vengeance. The air in the house shifted, the violent energy receding slightly. The ghostly figures of the Miek family faded completely, leaving only Amila's spirit visible. She moved to the center of the room and raised her small hand, pointing at each soldier in turn. The message was clear. She would hear their testimonies. They arranged the room as best they could to resemble a courtroom. A table for Dragon, chairs for the others, and a single empty chair at the head of the room where Amila's ghost occasionally appeared and disappeared like a flickering flame. Kovac, drawing on his limited knowledge of legal proceedings, established the format. Each man would speak, bearing witness to what they had seen and done during the war. Dragon would go last, providing a full confession about the Miek family's murder. This is insane, Auntie whispered as they prepared. We're holding a trial for a ghost. We're holding a trial because of what happened to a child, Emir corrected. The fact that her ghost is demanding it doesn't make the crime any less real. Kovac called the improvised tribunal to order. We are gathered to bear witness to the truth of what happened in this house in April 1992, and to acknowledge the broader truth of what has happened in this war. The house settled around them, the supernatural phenomena temporarily suspended. The only sign of Amila's presence was the occasional flicker of her ghostly form in the empty chair and the persistent cold that seeped from the walls. I'll begin, Kovac said, standing. My name is Lieutenant Petr Kovac, commander of Sokol Squad, Bosnian Defense Forces. I've served since the beginning of the conflict in 1992. He paused, collecting his thoughts. I've seen many atrocities in this war. Villages burned. Civilians executed. Mass graves. I've lost friends, family members, neighbors. I've killed enemy soldiers, men who, 3 years ago, I might have shared drinks with. The ghost child appeared more distinctly now, watching him with solemn attention. I've tried to conduct myself with honor, Kovac continued, to follow the rules of war. But I've also looked the other way sometimes. When my men took souvenirs from abandoned homes, when prisoners were treated roughly during interrogation, small compromises that seemed necessary at the time. He looked directly at the ghost. I never participated in or ordered the murder of civilians, but I have been silent when I should have spoken, passive when I should have acted, and for that, I bear responsibility. The ghost nodded slowly, accepting his testimony. The chair beside Kovac creaked, signaling Marko to speak next. My name is Marko Jovanovic. I'm Croatian by birth, but I consider myself Bosnian now. He shifted uncomfortably. Before joining the defense forces, I was with a Croatian militia. We were aggressive in reclaiming territory from Serbian forces. He stared at his hands. In a village near Mostar, we found 3 Serbian men hiding in a basement. They claimed to be civilians, but we'd been ambushed the day before and lost 2 of our own. We were angry. Suspicious, he swallowed hard. We executed them. No trial, no questions. Just 3 bullets. The ghost child flickered, her form momentarily taking on a darker aspect before settling back into the appearance of a young girl. I've never told anyone that before, Marko admitted. I've tried to atone by serving honorably since, but those men's faces haunt my dreams. Luka spoke next, then his brother Antti. Their testimonies were similar young men caught in a conflict that had stripped away their humanity piece by piece. Small cruelties, moments of weakness, instances where they'd chosen tribal loyalty over universal morality. When Emir's turn came, he spoke softly but clearly. I joined as a medic because I wanted to save lives, not take them. I've treated everyone who came under my care, Bosniak, Croat, Serb, enemy or friend. The ghost watched him intently. But there was a day, Emir continued, when our field hospital was overwhelmed after a major battle. We had to decide who would receive treatment first. I found myself prioritizing our soldiers over enemy wounded, even when some enemy soldiers had more severe injuries. He looked up at the ghost. I told myself it was logical, that our men would return to the fight, while enemy soldiers would become prisoners. But the truth is, in that moment, I valued some lives over others. 8 Serbian soldiers died who might have lived with immediate treatment. I've carried that knowledge ever since. Throughout these testimonies, Dragan sat hunched at the table, his face pale, eyes fixed on the floor. When his turn finally came, the house seemed to hold its breath. The temperature dropped further, frost forming on the windows despite the spring season outside. Amila's ghost solidified, more present than they had yet seen her. My name is Dragan Nikolic, he began, voice barely audible. In April 1992, I was part of a Serbian paramilitary unit called the Wolves, led by Vuk Stanic. He described how he joined the unit after his family fled Sarajevo, how Stanic had manipulated the young refugees' grief and anger, molding it into hatred, how the unit had moved through eastern Bosnia, cleansing villages of non-Serbian inhabitants or those, like the Mijeks, whose loyalty was suspect because of mixed marriages. We came to this village on April 18th, 1992. Dragan continued, his voice strengthening as the confession poured out of him. Stanic had intelligence about families to target. The Mijeks were at the top of his list because Selim was respected in the community. Stanic said making an example of them would ensure the cooperation of others. The ghost child flickered violently at the mention of her father, the air around her distorting with emotional energy. I was assigned to secure the perimeter with another man, Goran Lukic. We were the youngest. Dragan's voice cracked. I heard the gunshots when they executed Selim and the boys. I heard Vesna screaming inside. I did nothing, said nothing. I just stood there, holding my rifle, watching the road. Tears streamed down his face. After it was over, Stanic ordered us to search the house for valuables, and then burn it. I searched the ground floor and cellar. I never knew about the attic crawlspace. I never knew Amila was hiding there, wounded, watching us through the floorboards as we looted her home and discussed what had happened to her family. The house trembled, dust falling from the ceiling. Objects around the room began to vibrate in response to the ghost's growing agitation. The others in the unit were Vuk Stanic, our leader, Goran Lukic, who was with me on perimeter duty, Milan Petrovic, who shot Selim and the boys, Darko Kozic and Ivan Jokic, who took Vesna inside. Dragan's voice had become mechanical, reciting the names and crimes with the precision of a formal testimony. After leaving this house, we continued to other villages, similar operations. I participated in 27 such cleansings before deserting 4 months later. He looked up at the ghost child, his eyes red-rimmed but clear. I can identify all of them. I know where most of them are likely to be found. I will testify against them in any court, provide any evidence required. My life is forfeit, I accept that. But let it mean something. Let it help bring the others to justice. The confession complete, silence fell over the improvised courtroom. The ghost of Amila Mijek stood in the center of the room now, her form more solid than they had yet seen her, a small girl in a blood-stained dress. dark hair framing a solemn face that flickered occasionally to reveal the skull beneath. She raised her hand, pointing first at Dragon, then at each of the other soldiers in turn. Her message was clear. She had heard their testimonies and rendered judgment. The house shuddered around them. Objects that had been floating gently crashed to the floor. The doors, which had been supernaturally sealed, suddenly swung open. Windows that had been blocked became simple broken glass again. "Is it over?" Auntie whispered. Before anyone could answer, the ghost glided to Dragon and extended her small hand toward his face. He flinched but didn't retreat, accepting whatever final punishment she might inflict. Instead of attack, her fingers merely brushed his cheek, leaving frost-white tracks like tears on his skin. Then she turned and pointed toward the stairs, the ones leading to the attic where they had found her remains. "I think she wants us to bury her," Emir said softly. Kovac nodded. "A proper burial. It's the right thing to do." The ghost child nodded once, then faded from view, though her presence remained palpable in the cold air and occasional disturbances of objects around them. "We'll do it at first light," Kovac decided, facing the garden behind the house. As they prepared for one more night in the haunted house, the atmosphere had changed. The malevolence had receded, replaced by a solemn expectancy. The ghost's rage had been tempered by their acknowledgments, their testimonies, and especially by Dragon's confession. They maintained watches through the night, but the supernatural phenomena were minimal now. Occasional footsteps upstairs, the slight movement of objects, cold spots that came and went. The ghost child appeared briefly to each man during his watch, not threatening now but observing, as if memorizing their faces, ensuring they would keep their promises. When dawn finally broke, they gathered in the attic crawlspace. Kovac and Luka carefully wrapped Amila's remains in a clean blanket from their supplies, handling her bones with gentle respect. Emir retrieved the blood-stained porcelain doll, wrapping it alongside her. "We'll bury her with her family," Kovac said. "They should be together." As they carried the small bundle down the stairs and through the house, the building seemed to sigh around them, floorboards creaking, walls settling, as if releasing a long-held breath. The rain had diminished to a gentle drizzle as they stepped into the overgrown garden behind the house. The storm clouds were breaking up, allowing shafts of sunlight to penetrate, illuminating the neglected space in a patchwork of light and shadow. "There," Emir said, pointing to a spot beneath an apple tree. "That would be a good place." They had no proper tools for digging, but Luka found a rusted shovel in a garden shed, and they took turns breaking the rain's softened earth. As they dug, each man was silent, lost in his own thoughts about the child they were laying to rest and the family that had been destroyed in humanity's endless capacity for cruelty. They felt they were not just preparing Amila's grave, but also digging into the layers of their own complicity in the war that had consumed their country. None of them had killed the Miek family, but all had participated in a conflict that made such atrocities possible. Dragon worked the hardest, his bound hands making the task awkward, but his determination unwavering. No one had suggested untying him, and he hadn't asked. The physical pain of his labors seemed to provide some small measure of relief from the greater pain of his guilt. As they dug, the presence of Amila's ghost remained tangible, a cold spot that moved around the garden, occasionally manifesting as a flicker of movement at the edge of vision. She watched them work with solemn attention, neither helping nor hindering. When the grave was deep enough, they carefully lowered the blanket-wrapped remains into the earth. Emir, who had been raised Muslim but had studied other faiths in his medical training, stepped forward. "I'd like to say some words," he offered. "A prayer for Amila and her family." Kovac nodded. "Please." The men gathered around the grave, heads bowed. Even Dragon joined the circle, though he kept a respectful distance from the others. Emir began in Arabic, reciting the janaza prayer traditionally offered for the Muslim dead. He then transitioned to Serbian, incorporating elements of Orthodox Christian burial rites to honor Vesna's heritage. Gospod, primidusu tivoji sluj, Lord, they'll receive the soul of your servant. Finally, he spoke in the common language they all shared. We commit the body of Amila Mila Miak to the earth, and we remember her family Selim Vesna, Dino, Wea, and Farouk, whose lives were taken in hatred and fear. May they find in death the peace that was stolen from them in life. He paused, looking around at his comrades. Let us also acknowledge that we stand here as representatives of the forces that tore this country apart. Croatian, Serbian, Bosniak, we have all committed acts in this war that we must answer for. As we bury this child, let us also bury our hatred for one another. The ghost of Amila appeared then, standing at the foot of her grave. More substantial than before, she was clearly visible, even in the daylight, a small girl with dark hair and solemn eyes, watching them with an expression that had softened from rage to something more complex. We promise you, Amila, Kovac said directly to the apparition, that we will see justice done for your family. Dragon will testify. The men who did this will answer for their crimes. The ghost child nodded slowly, then turned her attention to Dragon. He stepped forward, awkward with his bound hands. I can never undo what happened here, he said, voice breaking. I can never bring you or your family back. But I swear by whatever remains of my soul that I will not rest until Stanek and the others face justice. For a long moment, the ghost studied him, her expression unreadable. Then, unexpectedly, she nodded once, not forgiveness, perhaps, but acknowledgement of his pledge. They began to fill in the grave, each man taking a turn to shovel earth over the small bundle. As the last of the soil was patted into place, Marco gathered stones from around the garden to mark the site. Emir placed the cloth doll they had found earlier atop the grave. So she won't be alone, he explained. As they stood in a final moment of silence, the clouds parted further, allowing a beam of sunlight to fall directly on the fresh grave. In that moment of illumination, the ghost of Amila Miak seemed to transform, the bloodstains on her dress fading, her form becoming less solid but somehow more complete. For just an instant, they glimpsed her as she might have been in life, a smiling child with bright eyes and an unbroken spirit. Then she was gone. Not with a dramatic dissolution, but a gentle fading, like mist under morning sun. The supernatural cold that had permeated the house and garden dissipated. Birds began to sing in the nearby trees, and a gentle breeze stirred the leaves of the apple tree above the grave. Is it over? Auntie asked, repeating his question from earlier. The haunting, perhaps, Emir said, but our responsibility is just beginning. They returned to the house to find it transformed. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted. Furniture had returned to normal positions. Doors operated as they should. The building was still damaged, still bearing the scars of violence, but it no longer felt malevolent. As they gathered their equipment and prepared to leave, each man found himself drawn to a private moment of reflection. Kovac stood in Amila's bedroom, looking at the faded pink walls and the small bed where a child had once slept safely, never imagining the horror that would engulf her family. He removed a medallion from around his neck, a family heirloom his grandmother had given him for protection, and placed it on the pillow. Watch over her, he whispered, unsure if he was addressing the medallion, his grandmother's memory, or some higher power. Emir returned to the cellar one last time, carefully organizing the family photographs and documents they had disturbed. He took out his field journal and wrote the names of the Miak family, adding details of their lives and deaths. On a separate page, he listed the names Dragon had provided the men responsible for the massacre and their last known locations. They will be remembered, he promised the empty room, both the victims and the perpetrators. Marco and the brothers, Luca and Auntie, checked the house's perimeter, securing it as best they could against looters or animals. Though they worked in silence, each found himself handling the task with unusual care, as if the building deserved respect now rather than fear. Dragan asked to visit the grave again before they left. Kovac accompanied him, standing a few paces back as the Serbian soldier knelt awkwardly beside the fresh earth. "I was a coward then," he said softly, seemingly speaking to himself as much as to the buried child. "I won't be a coward now. Whatever punishment awaits me, I'll face it. And I'll make sure they face theirs too." As the extraction time approached, they assembled in front of the house. The storm had cleared completely, leaving a washed clean sky and the fresh scent of spring. Their radio confirmed that a helicopter was en route, expected within the hour. "What will happen to him?" Luka asked Kovac privately, nodding toward Dragan, War Crimes Tribunal. Kovac replied, "His testimony will be valuable, but he'll still serve time. Years, probably." "And us? After what we've seen here?" Kovac considered the question. "We'll give our reports, support his testimony." And then he looked back at the house, now peaceful in the morning light. "Then we carry this with us. The knowledge of what happened here. The promise we made." The distant thrum of helicopter rotors reached them, growing steadily louder. As they prepared for extraction, each man found himself taking a final look at the Miak house, memorizing its features, then imprinting the events that had transpired there on their consciousness. Just before the helicopter appeared over the tree line, Luka gasped softly and nudged his brother. "Look, the window." They all turned to see a small figure standing at an upstairs window, not the threatening apparition of the night before, but a child watching them leave. As they stared, she raised her hand in what might have been farewell. Then the helicopter was upon them, rotors whipping the grass and drowning all other sounds. As they boarded with their prisoner, each man carried with him not just the physical weight of their equipment, but the heavier burden of what they had witnessed, both the supernatural manifestations and the very human atrocity that had spawned them. The house grew smaller beneath them as the helicopter gained altitude, but its impact on their lives had only begun to unfold. They had entered as soldiers on a routine mission and departed as witnesses to both the darkest and most mysterious aspects of human experience. That night, as they slept in proper beds at their base for the first time in days, each man dreamed of Amila. Not the vengeful spirit or the tragic victim, but a peaceful child who showed them images of her family as they had been in life, laughing, loving, whole. In the shared dream, she led them through sunlit rooms, introducing them to her parents and brothers, showing them the happiness that had existed before the war's madness descended. When they awoke, each man carried a sense of purpose that transcended military objectives. They had made a promise in that house to seek justice, to bear witness, to remember. It was a promise they would keep, not out of fear of supernatural retribution, but because in that promise lay their own path to redemption. The Miak house stood silent once more. The grave beneath the apple tree lay undisturbed, a quiet testament to a child's fury transformed into peace. Each soldier knew their promise would endure, justice pursued not just for Amila, but for all the war had claimed, binding them to her memory long after the echoes of that haunted night had stilled.